Hello, everyone. I hope you are all of you that are watching this are doing well. I continue to think of you all and hold you in my prayers. And just a reminder to anyone watching this, whether you're a member of our church, a member of um, the surrounding communities and neighborhoods, or just anyone out there in the world, if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me for help, and I will do what I can. Working from home, recording these messages is all brand new, and I'm learning how, to be honest with everyone, how undisciplined I am. Uh, so as we continue to navigate through these uncharted territories, I hope and aim to do better with these videos, um, posting our worship services and other supplemental videos throughout the week. So please do be patient uh, with me as I'm learning. We're all learning how to live this new life together. In this past Sunday's messages, I shared that I would provide some more information about some of the prophecies that Jesus shared in the Gospel of Mark and their connection with Mark's theme of failed discipleship. Last Sunday, we discussed the first of these prophecies um, when when Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus, says, don't tell anyone, but in fact, Jesus was saying, hey, you've got it wrong. Don't talk about it. That's not the kind of Messiah I am, because Peter and the others are expecting a militant Messiah, but Jesus is anything but militant, anything but violent. And Jesus continues to tell his inner circle, the 12, and anyone listening, that if anyone wants to follow him, they must take up their cross. They must deny themselves first, take up their cross, and follow him. That if they want to save their life, um, they'll lose it. But if they lose their life for Jesus' sake and the sake of the gospel, they will save it. The second prophecy is very similar, and we read that in Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. They now left that district and made a journey through Galilee. Jesus wished it to be kept secret, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is now to be given up into the power of men, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. But they did not understand what he said, and were afraid to ask. So they came to Capernaum, and when he was indoors, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the way? They were silent, because on the way they had been discussing who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he must make himself last of all and servant of all. Then he took a child, set him in front of them, and put his arm round him. Whoever receives one of these children in my name, he said, receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me. In this second prophecy, Jesus is again reinforcing this idea that to serve, you must be last. You must become last. You must become the servant of all. And on their way to Capernaum, um, the disciples are arguing amongst themselves, and Jesus asked them, what are they arguing about? And they're arguing about who's the greatest among them, who's the top dog among them, so to speak. Um, and again, we see that in this argument they're having, they don't get it. They don't get anything that Jesus has been telling them. They don't get anything that Jesus has been teaching them. Again, they have failed. They have failed to see. They have failed to understand. Um, and because they're arguing about the greatest, I mean, that, in comes Jesus's lesson that if you want to be great, if you want to be first, you must become last. You must become the servant of all. You must serve others before you serve yourself. And in this text, in this prophecy, Jesus is discussing that he is going to be killed. He's going to die by execution. I mean, it says that the Son of Man is now to be given up into the power of men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. But they didn't. They probably heard the words, but they weren't listening, and they didn't understand what Jesus was saying. And they just argued about who was great. They argued who among them took precedence. And in their book, The Last Week, Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan make an interesting comment here when they write, here Mark is not only criticizing the disciples, he is almost lampooning them. So this is just, their disciples, the disciples' failure is getting a little bit ridiculous. So that's the second prophecy, and then the third is from Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 45. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were filled with awe, while those who followed behind were afraid. He took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was to happen to him. We are now going to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be given up to the chief priests and the doctors of the law. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the foreign power. He will be mocked and spat upon, flogged and killed. And 3 days afterwards, he will rise again. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, approached him and said, Master, we should like you to do us a favor. What is it you want me to do? He asked. They answered, grant us the right to sit in state with you, one at your right and the other at your left. Jesus said to them, you do not understand what you are asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said, the cup that I drink, you shall drink, and the baptism I am baptized with shall be your baptism. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. It is for those to whom it has already been assigned. When the other 10 heard this, they were indignant with James and John. Jesus called them to him and said, you know that in the world the recognized rulers lord it over their subjects, and their great men make them feel the weight of authority. That is not the way with you. Among you, whoever wants to be great must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be the willing slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give up his life as a ransom for many. This is the final one. This is a climactic and the most detailed of these three prophecies of Jesus that Mark records, and it's continuing this Lenten journey, this journey in space that the disciples have taken. They're on their way to Jerusalem, and the Lenten journey we take. Those of us who are Christians take from Ash Wednesday to Easter. Um, and Jesus in this, Jesus is once again trying to foretell and trying to explain his destiny to his disciples, and in order so that the disciples, the followers, and us can follow Jesus on the way, again through death to resurrection. But again, the disciples fail. Jesus is detailing what is to happen to him in the coming days, but here James and John and the others, they don't they don't care in a way. They're more concerned about what's going to happen to them afterwards. They am I going to I want to sit next to you, and I want to sit next to you. Assure us of that, but that's not the point of all of this. Um, they're just they're failing. They're failing again. Um, and so what what is interesting, what I appreciate about what Marcus Borg and John Crossan in their conversation about this third prophecy, um, that as Jesus and the 12 disciples and the followers, as they're moving, they're on their journeying from Caesarea Philippi, through Galilee into Jerusalem. um, they're on the road. Borg and Crossan point out that the Greek word that is translated as road is hodos, and it can be translated by a more symbolically open way. That is, Jesus and the disciples and the followers, they're on the way. They're supposed to be on the way through to death into resurrection. And we are supposed to be on the way as well. And they mention that they point out that Jesus is walking ahead of everyone, and that those who followed were afraid. A very appropriate response to being asked to follow someone into death and resurrection. Uh, yeah, being afraid, that's a very natural, very normal, very human response. Unless you're Peter Pan. I mean, Peter Pan was, to die would be an awfully great adventure. Um, and again, like in a lot of things, I mean, you've got a lot of these followers surrounding Jesus, but Jesus pulls aside the 12 disciples, his inner circle, to talk to them some more, provide them more in-depth details about what is going to happen. Um, and then he lays it all out. This is what's going to happen. He says he's going to be, and Borg and Crossan point out that this third prophecy is actually is an outline of Mark's account of Jesus's execution. He's going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes. Judas Iscariot, he betrays Jesus, and he goes to the chief priests and the scribes to betray Jesus, to hand over Jesus to them. Um, they will condemn Jesus to death. The high priest, he tears his clothes and he says, "Why do we need witnesses? You have heard this blasphemy. What is your decision?" And all that were present condemn Jesus as to be deserving of death. Uh, they will hand him over to the Gentiles. Um, as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. They'll mock him, and and we all know from uh, the Passion accounts, and especially they mock Jesus. They strip him of they strip him of this purple cloak they put on him, and then they put his own clothes back on him. They spit him. They strike his head with a reed. They spit on him, and they knelt down in homage to him, just to mock him, to belittle him, to humiliate him. And they flog him, and they flog Jesus. Pilate, wanting to satisfy the crowd that had gathered, he releases Barabbas, and then he had Jesus is flogged, and then he's handed over to be crucified, and they kill him. And on the Good Friday account, they crucified him, and they divide Jesus's clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. And after 3 days, he will rise again. And that's when we get to Easter Sunday. But he, the young man in the tomb, um, tells the women that have come to the tomb, don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. So as we listen to what Jesus is telling his disciples in Mark chapter 10, it's an outline. It's a really in-depth foreshadowing of what's going to happen on what we call Maundy Thursday, of Good Friday, and through Easter Sunday. So this really helps to hammer in the point that Jesus knows exactly, and he accepts it completely, fully and completely, what's going to happen to him when they reach Jerusalem. But these prophecies, as we listen to them closely in Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10, they're a call, an invitation to all of Jesus's followers, um, those then and those of us today, to accept this communal destiny of death and resurrection. It's something that all of us, it's an invitation, a call to all of us who follow Jesus to participate with Jesus on this road, on this way to death, through death, into resurrection. And that, as we've been hearing, as we've been looking at the last week of Jesus with help from Marcus Borg and John Crossan, often that road leads to confrontation with oppressive empires. That is a confrontation against violence. It often leads to confrontation um, with those who collaborate, the local collaborators, um, that is against injustice. Uh, and then after each of these prophecies, we hear again, and then particularly in this one, we hear again that the disciples have failed. Uh, they James and John, they, like I said earlier, they want to know. They're asking Jesus, grant to us that one of us can sit on your right and one of us can sit on your left. And Jesus asked them, can you drink the cup I drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? They say they can. Jesus says, okay, you'll drink the cup. You'll be baptized with my baptism, but I can't grant you to sit at my right hand or my left hand. That's not for me to decide. He says that's something that is for those for whom it has been prepared. And so it's interesting that James and John, they skip over Jesus's death. They just skip over it. Jesus has gone into detail of what's to happen. That he will be betrayed, he will be arrested, he's going to be mocked and flogged, and he'll be killed. He's going to die. But James and John and the others, they skip right over that, and their concern is Jesus's glory and their participation in that glory. So all of these prophecies, these three prophecies of Jesus that Mark records, they parallel each other in ways. Um, Jesus is challenging them to die with him, or to be ready to die with him, um, and they each uh, invite the listener, the reader, to consider how to behave as leaders. Um, that leaders serve, that leaders are servants. And so, what a lot of this is doing um, is to spell out what Jesus's destiny means for himself, for the 12, and for all of his followers. That this participation, this communal death and resurrection, is even if it's not physical, but metaphorically, it's that it's a new mode of existence, and it is to be a leader by serving, uh, not to be first, not to seek out greatness, excuse me, but to serve, to be servants. Um, and in their failure, James and John, and Peter and the others, um, they have not gotten that lesson. They have not learned that lesson. They have um, placed themselves first. They want to be on the top. They want to be on the top, like the lords, the rulers, the tyrants, like the empire. Uh, and that is that's the kind of world, this domination system, as Borg and Crossan call it, that Jesus is against. So I hope that is helpful to fill in some blanks about some of the prophecies in Mark regarding Jesus's death and resurrection, and this call to a servant leadership. I hope that is helpful. Have a wonderful day. May God be with you. Amen.